From the ink of Ms. Lost Whisperer's quill, a tale to haunt, to wake, to chill. Through cobbled lanes where dusk had sighed, a lady walked with measured stride. Her lace-gloved hands, so pale, so neat, clutched baskets full of bread and wheat. The gas lamps flickered, dim and weak, as whispers brushed the village street. A hush had settled, strange yet slight, a breath between the day and night. Then stirred the wind, a restless thing, it made the tattered leaflets sing. And in its waltz of dust and air, a crumpled page was drifting there. It danced, it turned, then tumbled down before her boots upon the ground. A single scrap, forlorn and bare, as if it longed for hands to care. She paused, a curious, fleeting thought, a nameless paper, torn and fraught. She bent, she took it, smoothed the fold, the parchment thin, the ink still bold. And there upon that faded face, a title sat in rigid grace. So stark, so grim, a whispered plea, a list of names. Unlucky bee. She scanned the names, the ink held tight, some known to her, some lost tonight. A baker's son, a merchant's heir, a widow frail with silver hair. She furrowed brows but gave no heed, a passing jest, a foolish deed. And with a sigh as if unsure, she tucked it in her coat once more. Then on she went, her path the same, through fleeting light and shifting flame. Unknowing still in fate's design, the list she held was no longer mine. For paper clings where doom is set, a fate once inked one shan't forget. And Agatha, with heedless grace, had tied herself unto its place. The days had passed in autumn's breath, as leaves lay curled in golden death. The village hummed with voices sweet, where lace-clad hands and whispers meet. Within the parlor, warm and bright, a hearth did dance with amber light. The silver spoons stirred sugared tea, as gossip flowed in gentle glee. "Did you hear?" gasped a lady fair, with auburn curls and knowing air. "That dreadful fall, poor Kensington, both arms are snapped, a leg undone." A hush did fall, a murmur grew, a tale so grim yet hardly new. For fate had oft a cruel embrace, and luck a fickle thing to chase. Yet Agatha sat pale and still, a creeping chill, an unseen thrill. Her breath was light, her hands like stone, a thought took root, a thought alone. For once before, in idle tread, she'd read that very name in dread. A fleeting glimpse, a scribbled stain, among the cursed, among the slain. That night, beneath the candle's glow, with trembling hands both sure and slow, she drew the paper, creased and thin, and traced the names that lay within. And there it was, in ink so black, a name she knew, a fate exact. Harold Kensington, boldly writ, as if the stars had chosen it. She closed her eyes, her breath ran tight, the flame beside her flickered white. For lists may tell, and fate may weave, yet none may know, none may believe. The weeks went by in restless haze, as winter stole the autumn's blaze. Yet through the streets and candles' gleam, a truth took root, a waking dream. For fate had carved its wicked path, a silent script, a whispered wrath. And Agatha, with careful eye, began to watch, began to spy. She saw the names, the lines so black, yet none could see the curse's track. For one by one, in measured tread, the listed met the fate they read. A maiden fair with curls so bright, her wedding dress was stitched in white. Her laughter chimed, her heart was true. Her groom, a man the town all knew. But Agatha, with lips drawn tight, had seen the name in ink that night. And so she spoke in voice so low, "Eleanor, be sure before you go." Yet laughter rang, so light, so free. "Oh, Agatha, you jest with me?" The church bells tolled, the vows were made, yet doom still lingered in the shade. For as she turned with blissful eyes, a sheriff's call, a town's surprise. "Seize him now!" the cry was thrown, a man unmasked, his sins well known. A murderer in silken guise, with stolen love, with whispered lies. And Eleanor in horror's keep, fell fainted fast, fell deep in sleep. A merchant bold, with stride so grand, a map unrolled, a list in hand. He planned a journey far and wide, a carriage set, a horseman's ride. Yet Agatha, with worried face, did plead with him to wait with grace. "Oh, foolish girl, you speak as crows," he scoffed and laughed. "A tale for those." But fate did twine its fingers tight and whispered through the morning light. For in his haste, his gloves misplaced, his minutes slipped, his path erased. And so he stood in Market Square, when cries of woe did pierce the air. A carriage tipped, a wooden groan, a twisted wreck, a shattered throne. All inside, to death were thrown, a fate unseen, yet now well known. With paling face and breath drawn thin, he turned to Agatha, guilt within. "Forgive me now, my foolish tongue," yet fate had sung. A mother young, with tender hands, she walked amidst the market stands. A babe in arms, a song so sweet. a heart so full, a love complete. Yet Agatha, with voice so strained, did beg her stay, did plead, explained. One day, my dear, delay thy tread. Yet Margaret smiled, yet Margaret said, what harm is there in steps so light? The day is fair, the sun is bright. But something in the widow's eye did make her pause, did make her sigh. And so she turned, she chose to wait, unknowing how she twisted fate. For ere the sun had reached its crest, a scream did break the market's rest. A cart ran wild, its driver lost, the weight of wheels a tragic cost. And there, beneath its wooden rath, lay broken glass, a shattered path. A baby's cry, a mother's wail, a story cursed, a fortune frail. And Margaret, with trembling breath, did clutch her child, did face near death. For had she walked, as planned before, the list would hold her name, one more. And so the weeks did weave and turn, yet fate's cold hand did not unlearn. For those who stood and those who fell had all been writ, their names foretell. And Agatha, with mind so caught, now feared the truth, now feared the thought. For paper writ in shadows deep will never lie, will never sleep. The village stirred in murmured breath, as fate wove tales of life and death. A name once whispered, now was known, a widow's voice, a curse full grown. For some would mock and some would fear, yet all would strain their ears to hear. The widow's warnings, dark and deep, had sown their roots where secrets creep. A merchant's fall, a mother's fright, a bride who barely fled the night. Too oft had fate aligned its tread, too oft had ink foretold the dead. A prophet speaks, the whispers said, her hand is blessed, her words are dread. Yet others scoffed, their laughter light, a foolish crone lost in her fright. A shadow clung to Agatha's name, a whispered prayer, a whispered blame. Some called her cursed, some sought her grace, some feared her sight, some kissed her face. A witch, they murmured, eyes like flame, a fortune-teller wrapped in shame. Yet others knelt and gripped her sleeve. Tell me, madam, what do you believe? Lord Hemsworth proud, with silvered crown, a man who ruled the timid town. With velvet cloak and measured stance, he scoffed at fate with careless glance. Superstition, dear Agatha? Next you'll claim the moon's command. Shall I fear the stars, the trees? Shall I bow at whispers in the sand? His laughter rang, so full, so wide, a skeptic's heart, a cynic's pride. Yet fate is deaf to those who jest, and scorns the man who taunts its test. For weeks would pass, then whispers grew, a tale of waves, of waters blue. A lord who strode where rivers swayed, a careless step, a life mislaid. A gasp, a splash the currents bite, a hand outstretched then lost from sight. They pulled him cold from waters black, no breath, no voice, no turning back. And there upon the widow's list, his name had sat, his fate was kissed. Then came the knocks upon her door, the fearful hearts, the pleading poor. A line of souls with lips so tight, who longed to know, who feared the night. A baker bowed, his hands like dust, shall I live long or will I rust? A woman clutched a love-worn page, shall I wed or face love's rage? A soldier bent with battle's mark, his eyes were deep, his voice was stark. Madam, tell me, should I go? Shall I return or rest below? Yet Agatha, with heavy heart, knew well the list, knew well her part. It told not joy, it spoke not light, it only named the lost tonight. For fate was firm, its ink was set, and warnings only bred regret. Some she saved, yet more would fall, for death still whispered through it all. And so she sighed, and so she spoke, a voice that trembled, thin as smoke. Take heed, my dear, take heed and wait, but know that none may change their fate. The days stretched thin in winter's breath, as silent winds wove songs of death. Yet Agatha, with weary sight, had traced the names, each met their night. No more remained upon the page, no ink to bind, no fate to cage. The list lay bare, its curse now done, and so she thought, her heart felt one. A breath she took, so light, so free, at last, perhaps, it lets me be. The fire burned, the embers low, she watched the final shadows go. No knocks, no cries, no whispered call, no doom that loomed within the hall. And as the stars took claim of sky, she let her weary body lie. Yet peace is but a fleeting guest, a kindly lie, a hollow jest. For fate once bound does not unwind, its hands still claw, its roots still bind. A wind did rise, so sharp, so thin, a presence lurked where none had been. And in the hush so deep, a single knock disturbed her sleep. She woke, a breath, a fleeting beat, a pulse that faltered, slow yet fleet. Then silence stretched, yet just beyond, a whisper wove, a shadow's bond. She rose, she turned, she took the light, a candle flickering, frail and white. Her feet were bare, her hands like stone, a heart that feared the truth unknown. She reached the door, so still, so wide, yet nothing breathed, no soul outside. No stranger stood, no voice was there, yet something lingered in the air. Then down she cast her wary eye, and there it lay, a folded sigh. A paper, crisp, untouched by tread, a whisper waiting to be read. Her fingers shook, her breath ran weak, a soul too lost, a tongue too meek. And yet she knelt, she took it near, she traced the ink in frozen fear. Upon its face, in blackened thread, a title carved, a fate unread. A name returned, a fate reborn, a list remade, its edges worn. No mercy held, no kind reprieve, no gift of breath, no chance to leave. A second script, a second plight, more names inscribed in endless night. Her hands grew numb, her throat ran dry, her heart beat slow, a silent cry. No end had come, no curse had waned, the ink still bled, the fate remained. She stood, she swayed, she closed her fist, she clutched the list, the second list, and in her chest a truth was spun. The list had chosen, she was the one. The months had passed in shadow's wake, as whispers clung to paths she'd take. The town now bowed, both low and high, some sought her word, some met her eye. The Lady of Fortune, they murmured in dread, she sees the doomed before they're dead. Yet Agatha with weary chest had long since lost her hope for rest, for fate had wrapped her tight in thread, a tangled weave of names unread. Each list unfurled, each fate was spun, and still she knew there'd be one. One evening, when the moon stood tall, she heard a sound, a paper's call, a rustling near her window sill, a whisper caught in winter's chill. Her hands reached out, her pulse ran tight, she took the page in candlelight, the paper crisp, yet old and feel, the ink still fresh, so dark, so real. She breathed, she turned, she traced the scroll, the names it bore, a heavy toll. Yet as she read, her breath was caught, her chest grew cold, her limbs were fraught. For there it lay, in cruel decree, a name she knew, her own Agatha Lee. She stumbled back, her vision swayed, her fingers shook, her thoughts betrayed. Had all this time the lists been spun, to lead her here, to be the one? No breath, no sound, no tear was wept, just terror vast, a fear unslept. She turned, she fled, her feet did race, the hearth's dim glow, her only grace. With hands now stiff she struck the flint, the embers roared, the flames took tint. And with a cry she cast it deep, the cursed page, a soul to keep. It curled, it cracked, it turned to dust, the ink dissolving, fate unjust. The paper burned, the names consumed, yet still she felt her death was doomed. The night grew wild with wrath untamed, the winds did howl, the heavens rained. The thunder cracked, the branches swayed, the walls did groan, the windows frayed. Then knock, a single hollow sound, a frozen pulse, a fear unbound. Then knock, knock, a second cry, a breathless hush, a fate drawn nigh. She pressed her lips, she stilled her frame, no voice to rise, no name to claim, no hand did reach, no lock did turn, she let the winds outside still burn. Yet silence held no gift of grace, for fate once named, one can't erase. The storm had passed, the winds had died, the sun arose in sallow pride. Yet echoes clung from midnight's breath, a whispered tale of fate and death. Through trembling hands and sleepless eyes she rose to face the newborn skies. A breath she drew, though light and thin, for silence lingered cold within. She took her steps, so slow, so wide, and crossed the threshold's yawning side. Yet as she walked the frozen stone, her weary heart turned into bone. For there, a branch so thick, so black, lay split in two across the track. Its weight had crushed the path she knew, the path she'd take, the path so true. She stared, she froze, her breath grew tight, a single twist, a different night. Had she but walked, had fate been kept, her life would now in ruin be swept. Yet was she saved, she spared? A gift of time, a moment dared? The list had burned, its ashes flown, the ink dissolved, the curse unknown. She let her lips form silent prayer, her fingers traced the morning air. Perhaps just once the thread had torn, perhaps just once she'd been reborn. A laugh, a breath, a fleeting whim. The shadows now grew weak and dim, and so she turned with lighter tread, no longer bound, no longer dead. But hush, the wind, it stirred anew, a whisper soft, a voice she knew. It danced, it twirled, it spiraled thin, a fleeting ghost of ink and skin. Upon the step where morning shone, a paper lay, cold and alone. Its edges curled, its face was creased, yet fate's own hand had never ceased. She bent, she reached, her fingers numb, her heart beat slow, her lips fell dumb. She grasped the page, she traced the fold, and felt the weight, so stark, so cold. Her name still sat in perfect scroll, a claim still set, a debt still whole. and at the bottom, dark and deep, the words appeared, a vow to keep. You cannot burn what fate will reap. She dropped the page, she turned to run, but knew the curse had just begun. For fate will call, and fate will keep, and all must bow before its sweep. She burned the list, yet still it stayed, for death once named will not be swayed.